Hello and welcome to another edition of our Manchester City podcast. Today I'm joined by our chief City writer, Simon Bajkowski, to reflect on another week of matches. Plenty of those coming at the moment, and much more besides. Obviously reflecting on the midweek win over Championship side Watford in the Carabao Cup, the injury to Rodri, and a little bit, just because I know how keen Si is to talk about all the off-pitch stuff, a little bit of APT and hearings and what have you. But we'll start where we should always start, which is with the football. And I guess perhaps the biggest talking point of the week, Si, has been Rodri, and obviously his injury last weekend, and the kind of diagnosis that we've got now, and the prognosis and the timescales. But huge miss, really, really sad news for the player. Obviously, big news for City as well to try and cope without him. But just sort of kind of update us if you can on what we know so far.
Yeah, it's been a very confusing week with Rodri, really. A lot of reports on Monday that he was out for 9 months. That was the end of his season. It was an ACL, and there was a kind of, I wouldn't say confusion around the club, but there was a bit of bemusement at the sort of level of certainty that people were speaking about, because they had sort of conflicting reports, and Guardiola said it on Tuesday night, like some of the diagnoses were that he was out for a long time, and others were that he was out for, a good few months, but maybe not season ending. I think it's close to being cleared up, and I think he will probably miss most of, if not all of the season.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, there's been enough uncertainty, whereas like ACLs are just normally sort of cut and dry. I think it may be the case whereby the player has maybe decided he wants surgery to sort of not have the risk of anything happening again. You have like the case at Newcastle with Sven Botman, I think, where he sort of decided against surgery because he had a partial tear, and then has ended up being out for much longer because he ended up needing surgery anyway, and things like that. So I don't know if that will end up, he'll end up being out for the season, but it wasn't as cut as dried as it seemed on Monday.
Yeah. And obviously he's an integral player. I think Pep said there's no one like him, and there isn't. He's the best player in his position in world football. But City did start the season without him, and last season a lot was made of the games where Rodri didn't play and City didn't get the results. But that hasn't been the case this season at all. Like, he missed the first 4 league games, Community Shield, and City almost didn't bat an eyelid. They just motored on regardless.
Yeah, and I think sort of the point is significant for the transfer window as well, because there will be pressure to spend in January, and City have money to spend in January. But how do you replace Rodri? How do you who out there in world football is there that you can say, yep, we'll take him and he'll do, but he'll do for 6 months until Rodri's fit again for next season? City have Claudio Echeverri, young teenage midfielder who they signed, who's currently on loan at River Plate still. Does he get fast tracks in January? Possibly, but if he does, again, he's not going to be a Rodri. He's not going to be starting every game like that. I think with City having no Rodri, they're going to have to. I think the brilliance of Rodri is that he does the work of 2 people. So they're probably going to have to use 2 people. Kovacic just said he's not very comfortable playing as the one. Gundogan did it in 2018-19 season, but is now 6 years older. I think we're going to see sort of Kovacic and Gundogan filling in with kind of Rico Lewis, John Stones, Manu Akanji pushing forward from defence, and maybe Bernardo Silva dropping back to help out as well. And because, as you say, like, they have done well without him at the start of the season, but it does kind of put an added question mark on, the Premier League biggest games, the biggest games in the Champions League, because he's, quite possibly the best player in the world as voted for by Ballon d'Or voters for this year. So you can't get over the loss.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a bit like the transfer window wise. It's a bit like the Alvarez one, isn't it? Oh, we need to go and sign someone to play behind Haaland, but who's going to come and be of the quality that you want to step in when if Haaland's injured, and also be content to not play 75% of the games, even more than that, perhaps.
Yeah. And of course, City thought they had kind of the perfect cover for Rodri, as did us and the rest of the world when they signed Calvin Phillips 2 years ago, and no one is able to put their finger on why that went so badly wrong. And I mean, you had we spoke to Mateus Nunes after the game on Tuesday, and he was saying, "Oh, I played all the times in a double pivot for Sporting." And you're like, "Oh, right," but then also, he's still to convince as a City player, and he might feel he's in a much better place, but we're yet to see that on the pitch. So it's hard enough to sort of find someone with the qualities to do it, never mind to then convince them, come and play now, but then not as soon as Rodri's fit again.
Yeah, exactly. And that injury obviously was one of many talking points from the Arsenal game, and I know you've been over that in great detail. Fortunately, the Watford game, which came ridiculously quickly on the back of that Premier League encounter on Sunday, everybody seemed to come through unscathed. City got the job done. I think Pep probably picked a slightly stronger team than maybe many anticipated, but they're obviously through, and they've battled through 2 games in whatever it was, 50 hours, something like that. And obviously won't want to be in that situation again. Shouldn't have probably been put in that situation in the first place. But Pep will no doubt be delighted that everybody came through unscathed. They got the right result, and they were able to rest up a little bit ahead of Newcastle this weekend.
Yeah, and they could have played at Watford on the Wednesday night. They were given that choice, and it wasn't a good choice, but it was probably better than playing on the Tuesday night at home for sort of recovery and health reasons. But Pep said, if it's 2 bad options, I'm going to take this one, and then we're going to prioritise the Premier League. And in typical Pep fashion, after the game, having won it and said, congratulations, you through to the next round, he was like, well, the next round we're going to play the kids. We're not going to put any effort into this competition if it keeps treating us like this. And you're like, right, fine. And then they get the draw away to Spurs, and you think, right, okay. Remains to be seen how strong a team they will put out at Spurs. But I feel like the shift of the Champions League and Club World Cup has really tipped the Carabao Cup kind of away from City's priorities even more. And it's gone from being like a competition that they really used to help spur them on to being a competition that kind of creates more headaches for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that game, the Spurs game, comes in between 2 Saturday games. So at least that week is looking what you would call a more regular week of football at the end of the month. So that's one positive for Pep if he does choose to see it. And then obviously Newcastle this weekend, again 12:30 away, on the back of plenty of minutes for players in the last 4 or 5 days. Difficult game without Rodri, but you just sense that City have almost started the season with that will to win that's carried them to so many titles at the end of campaigns. They already seem like they've begun the season in that fashion, even on the back of such a hectic summer, and Pep saying it might take us a few weeks to get into the swing of things. We've got players coming back here, there, and everywhere, but they rattle off 4 wins. I know they only drew against Inter in the Champions League, and they needed a last-minute equaliser against Arsenal, but they got the last-minute equaliser. The momentum's with City out of that game. You would suggest to go up to Newcastle.
Yeah, I think Arsenal will come away from last week, and we've seen a lot of it in the media, thinking they've rattled City. And there's a degree of truth to it, but City have been here and done it so many times, and they are consistently the best team over 38 weeks, and usually when a team rattles them, their response is to beat them and beat the next team and beat the team after that and beat the team after that. And they will love nothing more than going up to Newcastle in the 12:30 kickoff, picking up a win that moves them 5 points ahead of Arsenal and saying, over to you boys, because you talked at the weekend. So let's see if you can back it up with what should be a bog standard home game for them against Leicester. But it's difficult. City are the masters at applying pressure and applying the right kind of pressure when it's needed. And usually it's been saved for the second half of the season for Arsenal. But we've seen a bit of an early taste for it in this, with everything from Sunday. And it's not going to be easy for City. It's going to be really tough at Newcastle, and they've not had that much. I think they've had one day. It was recovery on Wednesday. They were off Thursday, so they've just got Friday to sort of run through things, and they're travelling up today because it's an early kickoff. So there's barely any time to prepare the game properly. But you do have a team of players that are not only very, very good at football, but also will have kind of an extra spring in their step to sort of be to get over the line at Newcastle.
Yeah, and they've got. I think they gave the right minutes to the right players at the right time. They haven't rushed Phil Foden into action this season. They gave Jeremy Doku and Savinho a half each on Tuesday night. Although they've had a schedule in nightmare to some extent this week, they've Pep and the squad have managed it in probably the best way they could have done in terms of getting match minutes into the right players at the right time and keeping some fresh for the tests to come.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, essentially everyone who played at Arsenal has had a full week off. Like Doku played a half and Savinho played a half against Watford, and Kyle Walker played again, but you wouldn't expect Walker to play on Saturday probably because Rico Lewis has been so good. So I think we will be able to see a strong team against Newcastle, and that will, that was the point of playing Tuesday and making so many changes. And it's great for City that they got through and still chance of silverware in that competition. But the Premier League is the main objective, and winning 5 in a row is still pushing people on. They've still got the sign on the boot room about 4 trophies, and they still want to win the Premier League above kind of all others, and they know how important it is to get points on the board early because they've been playing quite well, but they know what they can do in the second half of the season. So the better position that they can eke out for now, and the more points they can put on the board, well, no one's really looking at the league table because you shouldn't look before 10 games. The more they can do this in the first weeks of the season before the schedule gets more intense, the better position they'll be in.
Yeah. And you look at this sort of next batch of games sort of going up to, I guess, probably the Spurs game after the international break in November on paper. And I realise we say games aren't played on paper, and there's plenty of tough teams in the Premier League. We've seen that time and time again. But after this trip to Newcastle, there are matches there where 9 times out of 10, maybe even more than that, you would expect City to win, City to win, City to win, City to win, City to win. It's difficult to see too many after this Newcastle game in the next 4 or 5 where they'll drop points. And similarly, Arsenal, I think, have got a favourable fixture list, if that's the right phrase, over the next 2 or 3 weeks. So the opportunity to maybe, as you say, go 5 points clear of them on Saturday lunchtime, and then keep that foot to the floor and potentially extend that gap between now and the November international break. That's a huge opportunity for City.
Yeah, I mean, the more points they put on the board, they keep putting on the board, the sort of more leeway they have for dropping any points. Sunday will feel like a win because it was 30 seconds away from being a defeat. And if they'd lost, you'd have said, well, they've lost, but they had won all the games at the start of the season before that. And now they're still unbeaten and they're still top of the league. And if they win at Newcastle, then they should beat Fulham at home the week after. But if they don't, then they've got 6 games 6 strong games to fall back on. They should win at Wolves away after the international break. But if they don't, if they've got that body of work before them, then they're in a better position. And that, you know, you just keep moving the dial. You know, and as long as they go unbeaten as well, you know, for all Arsenal are celebrating their another draw at the Etihad. As long as City are unbeaten, it will feel like teams have to do that a little bit more to try and get something off them, because their aura will build again for as long as they keep not losing football matches.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. How, just quickly before we move on to a couple of minutes on things off the pitch, how do you sort of view that rivalry with Arsenal now? Is it needle? Is it full on? We don't like you and you don't like us. It's
Absolutely, yeah. But you know, you talk about before we move on. You say before we move on to off-pitch stuff, but you know, let's bring the off-pitch stuff into it, because Arsenal and City don't like each other at boardroom level as much as you know, on the pitch. The players are often kind of the last sets of people who sort of get involved with these rivalries. But you know, you can talk about Leandro Trossard being stupid, getting a second yellow. Well, how about Arsenal's chief exec being in front of all the cameras and not shaking hands with his City counterparts? It's just daft, and it gives people a story, and it lets people know, you know, it's just like it's the done thing, and you don't hear very much about Arsenal and City not liking each other, because they're very good at not letting things like that be talked about too much. But when you've got Tim Lewis not shaking hands with the City execs, it's kind of a bit of a slip there. And yeah, I mean, the game was absolutely full-blooded, and I thought, you know, Arsenal's response, I mean, I enjoyed their defending. I thought it was great. I thought it was a fantastic match in the second half. City trying to break one very good team trying to break down another. I've no idea whatsoever why Mikel Arteta is moaning about the referee and suggesting that they were forced to play that way, because they absolutely weren't. Like, they scored in the first half from 2 set pieces. It wasn't like they were sort of peak Pep's Barcelona before the red card. So they set up in a certain way, and yes, they didn't counter in the second half because they didn't have a second man, but they chose to be that defensive, and it was brilliant, and it nearly worked. So own it. Don't 2 days after be sort of trying to pretend everyone's stupid and say that Trossard was trying to pass the ball. And it's great. But also, I would say, you know, City have managed to get dark arts to stick. You know, City for years have been the team that tactical fouls, and everyone tactical fouls, and every winning team should want to tactical foul, but it's stuck as a dirty word around City for years. And this week, everyone's been asked about dark arts. And again, you've got to be really good at the dark arts to win football. But if that sticks on Arsenal, then I think that's a major win for City.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll just touch quickly on, because I know you've got the Man City press conference to attend shortly. So, but we'll just touch. And I know it's more what's the word? More conjecture, probably more noise around this than actual information around this. But what sort of update position are we in on the APTs after what's been reported this week?
Less information than we thought we'd have, basically. I think an announcement. So basically, the City legally challenged the Premier League over associated party transactions, APTs. Hearing was in June. Verdict was then written up. Verdict has to be agreed by the Premier League and City for it to be released into the public, because the Premier League is basically a private members club and they can do what they want. They don't have to be be seen to be making justice done. They just do it by their own rules. And we kind of expected there would be something this week in terms of the decision being released, and it hasn't been. But on Thursday at a Premier League meeting, another kind of vote on APTs was pulled. And that has been seen in some circles as a major win for City, in others as not so much. If we want to link it to the week for Rodri, I don't really think it's black and white. In part because it's really dull and niche and commercial. Like, I think for all the politics behind associated party transactions and why City think they've been brought and why City have challenged the league and 115 charges and all that, it is essentially about regulation versus free market and what is competitive and what is anti-competitive. And like, these things aren't that interesting and aren't that exciting. And it largely boils down to business. Like, is the Premier League doing its job to serve the Premier League and its clubs? And that's what City have been challenging, rather than sort of like a battle for the existence of the league and will things ever be the same again? And likely sort of nobody will really notice any difference, regardless of what matters. But I think obviously the optics, if City are seen to have won anything, it will be, positive for them, but also possibly bad for the Premier League. I don't think it will have much impact on the 115 charges hearing, which is ongoing as we speak. But, it's been a bit silly because when the news was first leaked, everyone was like, terrible, City are challenging these rules. They just want to bring the Premier League down. And you're sort of at a point where, people would rather rules stay as anti-competitive and sort of in contravention of EU law than City be proven right.
Yeah.
This kind of football tribalism. And, it's two different philosophies. But I don't think many people are arguing over sort of protectionist versus free market economics, and less versus, they're more sort of arguing, do we support Man City or do we not support Man City? And so it will be interesting when we get the full report. And I think there will be some good news for City, but the talk at the time was that it would be very difficult for City to claim like a full victory. And I'd be surprised if that's changed.
Very well surmised and very well done to link it back to the first in Rodri. It's almost as if we spent ages planning this podcast.
Yes, yeah.
Great stuff. Yeah. Right, thanks very much for your time. As ever, Si, I will let you go and challenge Pep on APTs, and no doubt we will be back for more City chat next week after the game at Newcastle. And you can, of course, follow every kick from St James's Park on the MEN website and all the socials, all the usual places, newsletter, WhatsApp, etc. Thanks for listening.